Good afternoon, everyone. And you heard just a little bit about me. And this afternoon, I would like to speak with you in this time after lunch when we all know if we are teachers, this is the hard time to teach. Because what we really want to do is not to return refreshed, but return and take a nap. They know about this in the kindergarten, and they work with it. So I am going to take the sleepy time with you, and I want to speak with you about something that we all already know about, and that is the place we call school. And so before I begin, just a little bit about myself. As Lee said, I have spent over 30 years in Waldorf education. And Waldorf education is one of the reasonably well-known progressive or alternative streams of education, based on the idea that we work with the development of the child, rather than what we often find in traditional education, which is to see how hard we can push against that development. That's a biased opinion. But what I also find more and more I am speaking from is my experience in that education as a teacher, a school administrator, an educator of teachers, and a consultant. But I was also a mother, watching my own sons going through their education. And just like the beginning of Run, it was my son, my oldest son, who took me on a quest to find an education that made sense to me, and where I landed then for a very long time. But now I am lucky enough to have the title of grandmother. 4. And I have found that this has changed my worldview. And I look at these little ones, my youngest one is 6 months old, and I think two things. One, that they are very brave to take up life at this point in human history. And two, to wonder what it is that they are going to experience in their lifetime. If I think back to my own childhood and how much has changed, and how much now change has accelerated to the point that none of us can keep up. What is it that they will face? What is it that they will need in their backpack for their journey of life? And how, for all of the children, can we start to change our idea of a place called school to something that is good for children? And I am aware, as I'm speaking with so many of you here from Rungarun or from contemplative education, that there is much here that you already know. And after I went and visited and stepped on the grounds of the school yesterday and felt the healing and health-building nature of being there, I thought perhaps I could just stand here today and say, the school as a healing place, do what they do. But I have a feeling that would not have satisfied, and it is actually not enough, because we cannot simply do what someone else does, but we need to ask questions about school and about children. And the need to ask those questions is urgent, because our children have one childhood, and they will have one hopefully long future to live with that from that childhood. So why look at schools? Because schools like Rungarun and like many Waldorf schools are sadly not typical. And I would invite you all for a moment, as it is after lunch and we are contemplating and resting, to take yourself back in your mind perhaps to when you were about 9 years old, yeah? Around 9. And just think of a memory of school. What did school mean to you at the age of 9? And if we had time, I would gather some of those memories and we would look to see what it was that stayed in your heart, in your mind, and in your body from your experience as a 9-year-old. Because what happens to children in school does indeed shape them for their lives. And so we need to use that time as wisely as possible. So the founder of Waldorf education, Rudolf Steiner, in 1919, a difficult time in European history, said, if we want to change the future, we need a new art of education. And that was the birth of Waldorf education. And I think we can say that again now. If we want to assist or help or change the future for our children, we need a different definition of school. We heard this morning from Tobin, my new friends, about this division that has lived in schools for over 400 years, where we have taken ourselves as human beings apart. And school has been for part of the human being. Often this part, at the expense of this part, and the higher part. And it is our task as we think about schools to ask how we can reimagine a school to prepare children for this crazy time that we live in, for unprecedented change and knowledge, for a future that we cannot possibly know. It is our task for them to reclaim school as a process, not as something that is geared towards an outcome, often an economic outcome, but that is about their humanity. It is time to reclaim school with time and space for children to be children. I'm not even trying to change the slides myself, because just looking at images often helps us. And childhood is a process. Childhood is a time that is entitled to its own space. Childhood is a state of being, and childhood is not just a stop or 2 or 3 stops on the way to this wonderful adult life when we will hurry and rush towards something else. So schools need to be rethought as places that honor childhood, that give it space and time. And again, I know I am saying something we all know, but it helps us to remember and to remind. Remember in our bodies, remind in our heads, so that we can do this difficult task. Because you all could remember so easily when you were 9, it is actually hard for us to reimagine school, because we come with all of our assumptions about what it is. That's what makes the Rungarun actually all the more remarkable. It's a reimagining of school. So one of the things we're hearing today, and one of the things I didn't say at the beginning, so I am saying now, is it is a tremendous honor and a privilege to be here with you. And I am mindful that if I am speaking about something as essential as school in another culture, I am going to make my own assumptions and I am going to make mistakes. And so I ask that you forgive me for errors that I make, but I suspect that in Thailand, just as in the United States or in New Zealand where I grew up, there are certain things happening in our schools that are putting our children under tremendous pressure. And that is why we have conferences like today, why I have been lucky enough to be a guest in this remarkable country. It's my first time here. And why I will attempt to weave across the ocean this idea of common ground around school. For many, many years in Waldorf education, we were rather proud of the fact that we stood alone. It's almost 100 years old. And that we were separate and we did things differently on behalf of children. And we sort of didn't need to bother so much with the rest of it. And that kept me very happy as a teacher. For a long time, I loved being a Waldorf teacher. I loved knowing the children year after year. I loved learning different arts so I could teach them with the children. I loved telling stories. I loved the journey of the curriculum. But something for me happened, and I think it has happened for many of us, where that was no longer enough. And right now, I am lucky enough in the United States to be working with a group of early childhood educators, because the older I get, the more I realize how very, very important that work is. And we have brought together people from Montessori, from Reggio Emilia, from Tools of the Mind, from High Scope Learning, from Bank Street, from Friends, and various others of these people who we have traveled alone. And now we are saying we need to find a common voice. We need to find that ground on which we can stand, where we all agree. This is simply what children need. Now, I may do it differently if I'm a Montessori teacher than a Waldorf teacher, for example. But we both agree, as just one illustration, that all children need to play. It's what we call a no-brainer in English. No-brainer. Don't need to think about it. And yet, what often gets taken out of school? Time to play. Because it's not productive. In someone's theory. So I believe that these conferences now that are bringing those of us asking the same questions and looking at children in a similar way are allowing us to build a common ground on which we can stand on behalf of our children, for the whole child, for holistic education, that we need to join forces. And so I am tremendously grateful for what I have learned in my 3.5 days in Thailand. I learned a lot. We had a very, very good tour guide for a couple of days. And yesterday, the privilege of walking the grounds of the school and experiencing the embodiment of this common ground that our children need. So it's interesting even that we have to talk about whole child, because children are not parts. I've never seen a part child. And yet the idea of whole child has become a bit foreign as we cook them at as high a temperature as we can to prepare them for their future, to be part of the economic efficient system. Whole child, we know, means every aspect of the child, not just the head, but the heart or feeling, the hands or doing, the indefinable, unique spirit of each one, the social, the emotional, that package of the human being. We know that integration is what our children are calling for at a time, 400 years and more in the making, where the tendency has been more and more towards fragmentation, pieces. Children are crying out to us for wholeness. Then we also know that, yes, we must prepare them for the future as we allow them to live in the past. And we have no idea what marvels and terrors they will face. But we know one thing for sure, it will be different. And we know from all of the research, and funnily from what the high-tech companies are telling us, that they will need these qualities of flexibility, of the ability to persevere, to get up again when they have challenges, of creativity, of resilience, because there will be challenges, of a feeling of meaning and purpose, and of the ability to connect. So here we have children fully preparing for the future, but living completely in the present. this power of play and creativity as the basis of these skills that they will need. I live not far from Silicon Valley, and it's interesting that many of the high-tech companies have playrooms for their employees, their adult employees, where they can be creative and flexible and explore their imagination and find new ideas. So I am slowly stopping talking about Waldorf education, although it is my path, and talking more and more about integral education. Some of the principles, again, are things we all know, and I am just here in this after lunch hour to remind us what we know. That true education must be based on the development of the child. That must be our basic textbook for what we are doing in the classroom. That it must involve the body, this idea of somatic, which we heard spoken of by Nimrod, the importance of the body, movement and play being manifestations of that. In a typical classroom, children sit for very long periods of time. It's not normal for a child. Creative, that the arts are essential both for themselves and as a way of experiencing and knowing the world. Experiential, what I touch, I can learn, I can take into myself. Relationship-based, again, both Tobin and Nimrod spoke of the importance of the relationship, that education is a human activity that happens between humans. In the 1960s, there was a movement in education to replace the teacher with TV. It didn't work very well. Then, of course, we see an iPad for every child. Often they don't work or are not used. This relationship, the one caring adult that can make a difference to a child's life. The idea of honoring each child as an individual, unique individual with potential and challenge. I've come from somewhere, I am here, I am going somewhere. The teacher as a participant in the learning rather than a finished process. I taught as a Waldorf teacher a class of 30 children from grade 1 through grade 8 for all of their core subjects. At the end of the 8 years, I could not honestly say that I had taught them more than they had taught me. And I was a different person. So this idea that the teacher is also transforming her or himself through this educational process. And perhaps the most important in this modern time, fostering connections, providing meaning and purpose, a sense for the child that I am glad I am here. I belong here, I'm part of something, and I am seen. So purpose and meaning is often lacking for our young people now, and it's the task of the school to help to provide it. So I'm going to go quickly through this because my talk today is really not to give an overview of Waldorf education. That I could do for several hours happily, but I want to just give you a little picture because Waldorf education now is at its 100th year. It will turn 100 in 2019. So we have a little bit of experience, both positive and negative, as we've gone along. And Waldorf education, just like I think all holistic education, really stands for the protection of this space called childhood. That we as the adults need to be the defenders of our children. It looks at phases of development in Waldorf education, 7 years. The first 7 years being a time of this great growth of the physical body, the huge need to do, the need to be protected, and the need to have a foundation of a feeling that life is good. This incredible capacity to learn through imitation, and this drive to know and to grow. The second 7 years we look at, from 7 to 14, as the age of feeling and imagination, this extraordinary capacity to imagine, to create, to learn from story, from relationship, and we hope joy in being a child. Sort of fades away by the time they're 12 or 14, but that they're able to rest fully in childhood. And there we want them to feel that life is beautiful. This space was created for us to learn today. Music, to begin with, to open our hearts. Beautiful flowers for our senses, our eyes. We want them to connect with the beauty of the world because they will also know of its trouble. And then from 14 to 21, this incredible development of independent thinking, which we want connected to their hearts and their capacity to do, which again we saw in spades yesterday. Water reclamation, recycling. I can change things. I can make a difference. My life has purpose. And what I'm most interested in as a young person, 14 to 21, is what is true. Show me truth. This picture of development in Waldorf education, we should be able to say, colors everything we do. That we can trace it back to the developmental stage of the child. In other words, the child is our starting point on our journey as educators. It emphasizes also the importance of relationship. We get to know each other really well. And this, for a modern child, can be incredibly important. Art is not something we can snip out with our budget scissors out of our school budget because it's woven through. It's an essential way of learning and knowing and being. Connections between myself, inwardly and outwardly, with my friends, with my teacher, with my family, with the community, with the earth, with nature. Feeling connected. Our goal is that at the end of the journey of Waldorf education, our young people can think freely, not be told what is true. And this becomes increasingly important in an age where we're not so clear. Again, Tobin mentioned artificial intelligence. It's not so easy anymore to know what is real and what is not. So the younger the child, the more they need to be connected directly to what is real and what is natural. So this affects everything that comes into the classroom. We know that the classroom itself, the school environment, this beautiful campus, is a teacher. That the way we shape the classrooms and the surroundings of the classroom leave a deep imprint on the children. And what do we often find in schools? John Goodlad did a study, I sort of stole his title, called A Place Called School. And he visited many, many, many middle and high schools in the United States. And what he found was often a surrounding that was ugly and cold and did not feel like a place of learning. We also know that the inner life of the teacher matters deeply. So suddenly my task as a teacher is elevated because I am responsible for what goes on inside me, not just for myself, but for the impact on the development of these children, for their lives. And then some of the techniques like story, drama, movement, art, and nature. But this goal of keeping the centeredness on the developing child and slowly moving out is one of the breathing impulses of Waldorf education. We're also finding it more and more helpful to look at the inspiration of trauma-informed pedagogy. And we could argue that this is a sad statement on modern life. But I hope this is not true in Thailand. But in the United States, we have a mental health crisis for increasing numbers of children and adolescents. The anxiety and depression that Nimrod spoke of, there are incredible figures of up to 1 in 5 US children will show signs or symptoms of mental health disorders in a particular year. That's 20% of our children. We know that suicide, not just attempts, but suicide is up. Children are not being welcomed into the world in a way that gives them that feeling of well-being. Not all children. The school is a place where we have a hope of changing that. Interestingly, when we look at trauma-informed education, we find most of the principles of whole child or holistic education. We see that the techniques of trauma-informed education are, number one, create a safe space. Are our classrooms and our school grounds places of safety for children that they can step into and relax? Number two, build relationships. And this needs to be on the traumatized child's terms, not on my terms. Number three, provide rhythm, routines, predictability, so I, as a traumatized child, don't need to worry about what is happening next. It is taken care of and I can be carried by the routine. Number six, artistic expression. A way of expressing what is going on inside me and of releasing it. Number seven, connection to nature. And we see again and again that we've become disconnected and that it is a child's natural condition to be directly connected with nature. And if that connection is broken, we see a rise in learning and behavior challenges. It's not the child's fault. It's the condition of living. And in some ways, because of these statistics on the mental health of children, we can argue that modern life is so out of step with the natural condition and pace of childhood that all children, even the most lovingly protected ones, are dealing with a certain level of trauma. Can any of you keep up with the pace of modern life? I know I seem to have less time, less ability to manage the inflow of information. And so some of these principles, which are very aligned with holistic or whole child education, give us some clues as to how we can manage and help children. The child needs to feel, one of the lessons from trauma-informed education, what I do matters. It's important that I am here. And this is the feeling of responsibility, that I am trusted to be a worker, to take care of others, and to take care of myself. What I do matters. I'm glad to be here. Then this last one, the idea of a school as a healing place, not just for children, but also, of course, for those of us lucky enough to work in places that are healing schools, but also for the family and the wider community. And again, as we arrived at the school yesterday, there were vegetables for sale, there was a bookstore, there was a feeling of community. And the school is a reimagined school, is a logical place to be a community hub, a community center. We know that our parents are asking for help. I don't know what it's like in Thailand, but we are dealing with parents who are anxious. It's not just the children. They want to do it right. They may have lost that feeling of what was always done in the family. They look up a solution on the internet and get 500 possible ways of dealing with the situation. I had one baby book when my children were little, and that was probably one more than my mother had. But now I watch my daughters-in-law and the flood of information. So parents want support, and they will turn to us in the school. So they want a guide. Not that we tell them what to do, but that we partner with them about what we know about childhood and what they know about their family. The school can change things like nutrition, both at school and in the home. It can change our ideas about the medical care of children. It even goes down to the level of different ways of thinking about clothing. What really does the child need? Appropriate clothing that allows them to move and doesn't distract them from being a child. It can reinforce, we hope, not impose, but reinforce family values. So this idea of the school as a reimagined hub, which I believe you have developed here, where people feel welcomed. They see themselves and their family cultures reflected in the school. They can come and stay a while. They can find like-minded parents. They can get advice and resources. So our job as schools does not stop with the children, not anymore. And then this idea that the school can look outward, this remarkable service work that is done here, because it's not just the children who need to feel useful and engaged, but opportunities for families to work together on behalf of the community. And a cycle of festivals. I'm told in Thailand that you celebrate many, many festivals, Thai and other. But this idea that somewhere in the cycle of the year, I find myself honored and celebrated. Then very quickly, so we have a couple of minutes for questions. People together, coming together, moving together, a festival. We need to look with the school as a healing place at what we can immediately see and what is invisible. This idea of the explicit curriculum, that's the one that the government tells us we need to teach, and what we're really teaching, which is how to be a human being, what type of human being, what our values are, how we behave towards others. We need to ask, do we stay in the old paradigm of a closed system where I know a lot because I've been to university and I'm a trained teacher, and I will give you some of that knowledge, or I help you from a whole child perspective with the developing child in the center in the process of being and becoming a full human being, developing the capacities that I will need, both of us, teacher and student, to enter the future. This question of how we view a human being. In the United States, we carefully severed religion from education, and that has many values, but in the process, the danger is we lose the spiritual picture, the picture of the child as unique, as I said, on a journey that we are privileged to walk part of, and this idea of meaning. So what we want our children to feel in this place called school, a healing school, is that you are embracing me. You are embracing my life. You are supporting me on my journey with a few little corrections here and there. And that you are helping me to live and become a life of meaning and purpose. Because the mental health problems are really a reflection of a loss of meaning and purpose for most children. And that in my life, in my school, as a healing place, in my home, there are people who care for me. There is at least one caring relationship which can make a difference for a lifetime. That I am held and protected and pushed and encouraged along my path. So I hope that gives just a little sewing together. There is much else that we could say together, but this idea that one of our tasks is to really help our communities, our governments, our school districts, whatever, to begin this very difficult, challenging, and essential task of undoing our assumption about school and rebuilding it with this idea of school as a place that is welcoming, encouraging, supportive, and the center of a community. And I was amazed yesterday, as I said, after over 30 years in Waldorf education, of how fully realized that is just, I don't know which direction, but up the road, that we can experience and visit, and that I know I can take back with me to ask what else is possible. So I hope these few thoughts in our after lunch tired time have been stimulating for our thinking as we ask ourselves, what can we do to create these places of healing for our children, ourselves, and their parents? Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Elizabeth Beaven, for your shared experience. And I think it's time for the question and answer. ไม่ทราบมีใครมีคำถามที่จะถามหรือว่าอยากจะแชร์ร่วมกันในเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของการเป็นคุณครูในแนวทางเลือกหรือว่าเป็นประสบการณ์อื่นๆที่เกี่ยวข้องบ้างไหมคะหรือจะเป็นคำถามก็ได้ค่ะยกมือได้เลยนะคะภาษาไทยภาษาอังกฤษได้ทั้งสิ้นเลยนะคะมีไหมคะตื่นไหมคะตื่นนะคะโอเคค่ะขอไมค์ด้านหน้าด้วยนะคะ
Hello, thank you very much for your very good and inspiring talk. Just a very general question. You may not be very familiar with the schools in Thailand, but around the world there are many different types of schools that we could consider generic, boring, old-fashioned schools. And if you were to try to transform one such school into something like what you just described here, or the school you mentioned yesterday, what do you think would be the first most important key element to get started as a first step? Of all the different things we want to change, what would be the most vital one for the future of the child?
Just a small question for after lunch. By the way, I don't like being behind podiums and I don't like PowerPoints, but I know they help. So, Lao Tse, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. I don't think there's a recipe. And I don't think there is a thing. But there are many A things. So the question is, within my school culture, with respect for that culture and my responsibilities as an educator, what are some things I can do? And I've done summer workshops with teachers where I've encouraged them to be secret revolutionaries. So what might I be able to do? For example, if it doesn't happen, can I start the day by shaking the hand of the child as if it's within my culture and having a moment of direct contact? No budget cost. If the culture is such that they sit for a very long time, can I develop a toolkit of quick things I can do to break it up? Stand up tall, go down small, hide so no one can see you at all, round and round, rhymes, movement, so that we are working with them a little bit. We can't simply throw it all out and start again, but there are things we can start to weave in. And then we start to see a difference and other people in the school notice. And talking to our colleagues. Then there are practices as a teacher, looking back on the day and asking questions about what I did as a teacher will change what happens the next day. So just a couple of thoughts, but sprinkle, add some things. Be a revolutionary. We all can be without having to change. We can't all go and work in a different school. But whatever the age of children are, they have 1 year to be that age. So we can add some seasoning. I know the Thais like to add seasoning to their food. So what can we sprinkle in that will build the health of the child? And there are many things.